Before you go any further, subscribe if you think you could survive complete isolation. Like this video if you believe silence can be louder than screams. And comment below, how long do you think you could last in a concrete box without losing yourself? Because some men have tried, and some never came back the same. In the high desert of Colorado, where the wind scrapes across dry earth, and mountains stand like silent witnesses, there is a prison designed not to rehabilitate, not to intimidate, but to control. ADX Florence. They call it the Alcatraz of the Rockies. From the outside, it looks almost ordinary. Clean lines, low-slung buildings, guard towers spaced with military precision. Layers of fencing wrapped in razor wire that glints beneath the sun like broken glass. But inside, it is something else entirely. The air changes the moment the steel gate slides shut behind you. The sound is final, mechanical, cold. Every movement is monitored. Every second accounted for. Cells at ADX are designed for isolation. 7 feet by 12 feet, solid concrete walls. A narrow window angled so inmates cannot see the horizon, only sky. A poured concrete bed, a steel desk bolted to the wall. A toilet sink combination unit that offers water at the push of a button. There are no bars, only doors, thick, steel doors with a slot that opens briefly for food trays. When it closes, the sound echoes down the corridor like a hammer striking metal. 23 hours a day, inmates remain inside these boxes. The remaining hour is spent alone in a small recreation pen, a concrete enclosure sometimes called the dog run. Even there, the sky feels distant. One former inmate described the silence as heavy, not peaceful, heavy, as if it presses against your skull. The corridors inside ADX are immaculate. Polished floors, bright fluorescent lighting. Cameras positioned at every angle, motion sensors, controlled electronic locks, doors that cannot be opened without central authorization. It is not chaos that defines this place. It is precision, and precision can feel suffocating. The routines are relentless. Morning counts, meal delivery, medical checks. Everything performed with calculated distance. Communication between inmates is nearly impossible. Voices travel through vents, bouncing off concrete in distorted whispers. Messages are tapped through pipes in coded rhythms. Human connection becomes contraband, and yet, even in isolation, tension thrives. Some inmates housed here have committed crimes that shook nations. Others attempted violence inside lower security facilities and were transferred here as a final measure of control. ADX is where the federal system places individuals it deems too dangerous for ordinary prison populations. But danger inside ADX looks different. There are no yard fights, no crowded cell blocks. No gangs openly ruling tiers. The battle here is internal. Imagine sitting in a concrete cell while days blur into weeks. Weeks dissolve into years. The same footsteps pass your door at the same time every morning. The same tray slides through the slot. The same fluorescent light hums overhead. You begin counting cracks in the wall. You begin memorizing the pattern of your own breathing. Some inmates adapt. They create routines within routines, exercise regimens performed in tight spaces, books read repeatedly, letters written and rewritten. Others struggle. Mental health becomes fragile in environments built on restriction. Correctional officers walk the corridors in pairs. Calm, professional, detached. They are trained to maintain control without escalation. There is no shouting here, no unnecessary movement. Every action follows protocol, even sound is controlled. The prison feels less like a building and more like a machine, a system of steel, concrete, and surveillance working in quiet synchronization. But machines are operated by people, and people carry fear, judgment, fatigue. Behind one of those steel doors is a man we will call Daniel Reyes, not his real name, but his story mirrors many who have passed through ADX. Daniel arrived after an incident in another federal prison. Authorities deemed him high risk. He stepped into ADX expecting hostility, chaos, perhaps violence. Instead, he found silence, and silence unsettled him more than any threat ever had. On his first night, he lay on the concrete bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of ventilation. He waited for shouting, for arguments, for noise. Nothing came. Just the distant echo of a door closing somewhere down the tire. He realized something chilling. In this place, survival was not about fighting others. It was about not losing himself. The second week inside ADX Florence is when the silence starts changing shape. For Daniel Reyes, the first few days had been fueled by adrenaline. New environment, new rules, new calculations. He measured the cell with his footsteps. 7 steps lengthwise, 3 across. He tested the echo of his own voice, speaking softly just to hear something respond. By week 2, the adrenaline was gone, routine settled in like dust. At 5 a.m., the fluorescent light snapped on. Not gradually, not gently, instantly. A mechanical sunrise. Breakfast arrived through the steel slot without a word. The tray slid in. The slot slammed shut. Footsteps moved on. No faces. No eye contact. Daniel began marking time by sounds. The low rumble of a distant door unlocking meant shift change. The faint squeak of a cart wheel meant medication rounds. The hum in the ceiling vents deepened at night when the desert temperature dropped. He realized something else about ADX. It does not need to threaten you. It outlasts you. The recreation hour came mid-morning. His door would open electronically, and he would step out, hands cuffed behind his back, escorted by 2 officers. Their expressions never changed. Calm, professional, watchful. They led him to a concrete enclosure open to the sky, but sealed on all sides by high walls and mesh fencing. No yard chatter, no basketball courts, no gathering. Just a patch of ground and the thin strip of blue above. He tried to feel the sun on his face, but even that felt controlled. When his hour ended, the cuffs returned. The walk back down the corridor echoed with the same rhythm every day. The steel door shut behind him with finality. Inside his cell, Daniel developed rituals. Push-ups until his arms trembled. Sit-ups in sets of 100. Reading every word of the limited books available to him. He reread pages just to occupy time. He wrote letters he wasn't sure would ever be answered. Isolation changes perception. Minutes stretch, small noises grow enormous. The drip of water from a faucet can feel like a metronome marking your sanity. Some nights, he heard tapping through the walls. 3 taps, pause, to taps. He didn't know who it was, but he tapped back. Not words, just acknowledgement. A reminder that someone else existed beyond concrete. That was the closest thing to conversation ADX allowed. Across the tire, other men endured similar battles. Some meditated for hours, some paced in tight circles. Some lay still, staring at the ceiling as if trying to memorize its imperfections. The officers maintained distance, but they observed everything. Mental health checks were conducted through narrow door windows. Questions were brief. You good? Yes. The exchange was almost ritualistic. Neither side lingered. Daniel learned quickly that emotional reactions led nowhere. Anger bounced off walls and returned amplified. Despair sank into the concrete. The only strategy was control, controlling breathing, thoughts, impulses. But control can crack. One afternoon, during recreation, a distant shout echoed from another unit. Not loud, not chaotic, just a brief burst of human frustration. Within seconds, movement shifted. Officers responded. Radios crackled. Then silence returned as if nothing had happened. ADX absorbs disturbances. It does not allow them to grow. Back in his cell, Daniel began feeling something unexpected. Not fear, not rage, but invisibility. Days blended into identical frames. He wondered if anyone outside remembered he was there. He wondered if memory itself could fade inside a place designed to strip away identity. He counted the bricks in the wall opposite his bed. 216. He counted them again the next day to make sure they hadn't changed. The prison never changed. That was its power. Weeks turned into months. Daniel noticed how the officers rotated shifts with clockwork precision. How meals arrived at the same minute daily. How the lighting never flickered. How cameras silently tracked motion without blinking. It felt less like confinement and more like containment inside a perfectly calibrated system. And yet, beneath that precision, cracks formed in the human mind. One evening, Daniel pressed his ear to the door and listened to the corridor. Nothing. Absolute quiet. He realized he could scream and no one would respond immediately. Not because they wouldn't hear him, but because emotion meant nothing here unless it broke protocol. That realization unsettled him more than anything else. In other prisons, chaos defined survival. Here, survival meant enduring the absence of chaos. The machine continued humming, and Daniel understood something chilling. ADX Florence was not trying to break his body. It was testing whether his mind could survive complete control. In ADX Florence, silence is never empty. It breathes, it watches, it waits. By the time winter pressed its cold hands against the concrete walls, Marcus Reed understood something most men never did. You don't escape this place with your body, you escape it with your mind. The rumors had spread quietly across the tiers. The whispers traveled through vents, bounced off steel doors, and slid beneath the constant hum of fluorescent lights. They said a lockdown was coming. They said someone had tested the limits of the system. They said the administration was preparing to make an example out of someone. No one said Marcus's name out loud. The tension changed the air. Guards moved differently now, slower, more deliberate. Their boots echoed longer in the corridors, like they wanted the sound to linger. Cameras tracked every motion, even the recreation cages outside. Those lonely concrete pens under open sky felt smaller. Marcus stuck to his routine. Wake up, fold the thin blanket with precision. Wash at the stainless steel sink bolted into the wall. Sit at the small desk carved from concrete and read. Breathe in, breathe out. But beneath that calm rhythm, something was building. It started with a letter, not from the outside world. Those were screened, delayed, censored. This one came through the system itself. A notice slipped beneath his door during morning rounds. Administrative review. Marcus read the words again and again. In ADX Florence, reviews were rarely good news. They meant evaluation. They meant scrutiny. They meant someone upstairs had taken interest. He thought about the guard in the control room. The one who watched the monitors like a man staring at a chessboard. He thought about the quiet way information moved through this prison. Every glance recorded, every conversation documented, every breath accounted for. Had they seen through him? Because Marcus had not been planning a physical escape. He knew that was impossible. The layers of reinforced concrete, steel doors, pressure-sensitive floors, and electronic surveillance were too precise, too unforgiving. This place had been designed after the bloodiest lessons in American prison history. It was the answer to chaos. It was the fortress that swallowed the worst of the worst. But Marcus had been building something else, connection. Over months, he had learned the rhythm of the ventilation system, not to tamper with it, not to break it, but to use it. Short, coded phrases. Not about violence, not about rebellion. About survival, about patience, about discipline. He reminded the men around him that rage was what the prison expected. Rage justified the walls. Rage justified the isolation. Calm was unpredictable. And unpredictable things made institutions nervous. The review hearing took place through a thick pane of reinforced glass. Marcus remained in restraints, seated alone. On the other side, administrators in pressed uniforms flipped through files that contained his entire existence reduced to paper. Inmate Reed, one of them said, voice flat, controlled. Your behavior record shows improvement. Improvement, as if sanity were a performance metric. You follow directives. You avoid conflict. You maintain composure. Marcus said nothing. In ADX Florence, silence was power. We're evaluating a potential transfer. That word hung in the air. Transfer. For a moment, the concrete walls felt less solid. A transfer could mean step down. Less isolation. More human contact. A path out of the Supermax unit. Or it could mean something else entirely. However, the administrator continued, we've also detected unusual communication patterns within your housing range. There it was. Marcus's pulse remained steady, but inside, something tightened. We monitor for signs of coordinated activity. Even nonviolent coordination can undermine institutional order. Nonviolent coordination. He almost smiled at the irony. They weren't afraid of knives or riots. They were afraid of influence. Weeks passed after the hearing. The prison seemed to lean in closer, listening. Cell searches became more frequent. Lights stayed on longer during night checks. The silence grew heavier. Then, one morning, his door opened. Reed, pack up. The words were simple. No explanation. Marcus gathered his few belongings, letters, a paperback novel worn at the edges, a stack of handwritten notes filled with reflections and fragments of philosophy he had pieced together during endless hours alone. He was escorted down corridors he had never walked before. Past reinforced checkpoints, past control panels glowing with silent authority, past other cells where unseen eyes followed him through narrow slits of glass. He didn't know if this was punishment or progress. Finally, they stopped. A door opened. The new cell looked almost identical to the old one. Concrete bed, steel toilet, narrow window angled toward nothing but sky. But something was different. The door across the tire opened too. Another inmate stepped out, escorted to his own space. Marcus felt it immediately. Sound, faint, but real. The possibility of conversation without shouting into vents. The possibility of human presence measured in feet, not yards. A step-down unit. ADX Florence hadn't broken him. It had studied him. And in studying him, it had revealed its own fear. The twist wasn't that Marcus escaped. It wasn't that he staged some impossible breakout or outsmarted the most secure prison in America. The twist was this. He survived by refusing to become what the prison expected. ADX Florence remained standing, cold and unyielding against the Colorado mountains. It continued to hold men the world had written off. It continued to operate with mechanical precision. But somewhere inside those concrete walls, a quiet shift had occurred. Not a riot, not a rebellion, a realization. Even in the most restrictive prison in the United States, control is never absolute, because the one thing no wall can fully contain is the human mind. And in a place built entirely on isolation, the smallest act of connection can echo louder than any door slam. The silence that followed wasn't defeat, it was transformation.